But for as long as I remember, I always wanted a client-side validation library that works just the same way Laravel does validation. So that's why I built Intus. Apart from the ease of use, what I wanted to cover with Intus and what's often missing from popular libraries is validation based on the value of other fields and the ability to use wildcards to validate array items. Now Intus comes with lots of rules, so it's impossible for me to cover all of them in one go. But hopefully this video will give you an idea on how the library works and maybe you'll even try it on your next project. Here we have an example form used to create a new recipe. We have a form variable, which is a reactive object with name as a string, ingredients as an array, and description. This onAddIngredient function pushes a new ingredient inside the form ingredients array. This function is called whenever we click on the Add Ingredient button. We also have an onRemoveIngredient function that removes an item from the form ingredients array. This one is called when we click on the Remove button. Finally, we have an onSubmit function, which is called whenever we submit the form. Here we have a list of validation rules we need to implement. So let's get to it. The first thing we're going to do is install Intus using npm. So I'll open my terminal and type in npm install Intus and hit enter. Let's import Intus. We'll do import Intus from Intus. And then down here inside our onSubmit function, we'll create a new validation. We'll do let validation equals intus.validate, and here we can pass in data, rules, and messages. This last one is optional. So we'll do data, which is our form.value, and then for rules, we'll have an object. To set rules for a specific field from our form data, we need to use its name as key, and then we'll have an array of rules as the value. So for example, we'll have name as key, and then an array of rules. Intus rules are very similar to the Laravel ones. The only difference is they are prefixed with is, and they come in camel case. So for name, we have required and min free. So we'll do is required, and then is min, and we'll pass free as the argument. Let's import these two from Intus/rules and continue with the ingredients. We'll have ingredients, and this one is required. Moving on, we have ingredient name is required. Now here we are dealing with an array of ingredients. To add rules for the first item of the array, we would do something like this. We would have ingredients .0 for the first item of the array, and then .name is required. Then we would do ingredients.1.name is required, ingredients.2.name is required, and so on. The problem is we don't know how many items that array will have. And this is where the wildcard comes into play. We replace the number with a wildcard, remove the other ones, and this will make it so that the rules are applied to every item inside the ingredients array. Let's do the same for the ingredient quantity. I'll duplicate this, say quantity is required and is min 1. Then we'll have description with is max of 255 characters. So description is max 255, and let's import this. Now to check whether or not the validation passes, we can do validation dot and then call the passes function. To get the errors, we can do validation.errors. An important thing to note is that errors will only give us the first encountered error for each field. For example, here when validating the name, if the name is empty, we will only receive the error message for the is required rule. Let's console log these two. We'll do console.log, paste that in. Let's remove the alert, refresh, open up the DevTools, hit submit, and here are the error messages. We have ingredients is required and the name is required. Let's add one character to the name, hit save, and now we have name must be at least 3 characters long. So let's type in AAA, add an ingredient, let's say bread, hit submit again, and now we have ingredients.0 quantity is required. Now, because of the field name, this message is a bit weird. Fortunately, we can replace field names as well as entire error messages by passing in a third object to our validate function. Here we can do object and then ingredients.star.name and say name. Let's do the same for quantity. And now if we refresh, add an ingredient, hit save, we now have a more suitable error message. So we have name is required, quantity is required, and then name is required again for the recipe name. But as I said, we can also replace entire error messages. To do that, you need to type in the field name, so let's say name, and then the rule, let's say is required. So name is super required. Let's refresh, hit save, and here is our error message. Name is super required. Now let's go ahead and display these errors. To do that, we'll create a new variable, a reactive variable, called, of course, errors. And it will be a reactive object. Now down here, we'll just do errors.value equals validation.errors. Scrolling down, I'm using some custom form components that can receive an error prop. Nothing special, they just display the error prop and change their border color to red when we have an error. So we can do error and say errors.name. Let's refresh, save. If we scroll up, we have name is super required and the border is changed. Moving on, we have the ingredients. Now here we can just say error equals errors.ingredients.star.name. We need to pass it the exact index. And we also need to use square brackets here. So here we'll do ingredients dot, and then we'll pass it the index. So the current index of the iteration. Let's grab this and do the same for quantity. And then down here we also have the description. So let's say errors.description with a single S. Let's refresh, add an ingredient or two, hit save, and here are the errors. Now we also need to display an error when we don't add any ingredient. So now we should have here ingredients is required. To do that, I'll go and find the ingredients label and add form field error, which is the component I use for errors, and we'll do errors.ingredients. But we'll only display this if we have an error. So if, paste that in, refresh, hit save, and here's the error. Once we add an ingredient, that error goes away. And that's pretty much it. All we'd have to do now is basically check if the validation passes. So if validation passes, and then here we would submit our form. And that was it. This was a short intro to Intus. There are many other rules you can pick from. There's also a way to define custom rules and globally override error messages. Go ahead, try it out, and hopefully you'll find it useful. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, share it, subscribe, click the bell button, all that good stuff. Bye!